Thanks, Brad. I'll just get right into it. What I want to talk to you guys today is about transforming that sideline operation into more of a commercial type beekeeping operation. So I'll be talking about adopting some more commercial type management practices. But what I want to say before, it's really intimidating when beekeepers come and talk about how they manage their craft and how they understand what they do, because we all understand this business a little bit differently, okay? And we have different abilities and we have different ways to be able to get the same job done. So there will be some commercials in here. Will be critical maybe on some of my management techniques here, so don't throw wrenches at me. Yeah, just understand that this is the way I see beekeeping and this is the way that this is how I do it. Okay. So how many in here are kind of like a sideline beekeeper type? 40 hives, 50 hives, 100, yeah. So I've been through all the steps. I've built my operation up, so I've asked all the questions and I've searched all the answers, so I can relate to you guys a little bit. So I'm speaking kind of towards you guys, and you guys probably have the same ambition I did, turning your business into something full-time and making something out of it. So I just want to bring some of that to you. One of the biggest considerations what we need is to be able to manage our time. It's like any other business owner. Managing a business, time is our most precious asset. So we got to be able to do our work in less time, right? And do it properly, right? So time would be a big consideration. So insight in like a little more of a commercial setting. How do we do it? Like how do you transition your operation into more of a commercial setting? So you're going to be managing time. At the same time to manage your workload, but we got to pay a lot of attention to our work-life balance, and that's very important, the whole thing. If you don't have a life while you're trying to do what you're doing, everything's going to fall apart on you, right? So that's probably one of the biggest things. But so I'll get right into it now. So understanding hive behavior, and I'm just going to show you just a glimpse on how I understand the bees and how they work, and then I developed my whole system around that. So this is a graph from Randy Oliver. It's like a bee life chart. It shows the age. Right here's your brood line. Okay, and then you see here's summer, that's the big population in here. Here's your fall nest being developed and your winter bee nest here, okay? So right in this particular time of year is when the bees develop that winter nest, and they're supercharging those bees with protein and fats. And I won't get into the complexities of protein and fats dynamics in the wintering colony, because there's people in here who can do a better job. But throughout the winter, those winter bees, they're hanging on to those proteins and those fats, right? And they're hanging on and they're hanging on to that gold until spring. So right in here, these bees are getting around, 175 days, 200 days before we put them out. So when I put them out, right in this particular time, this is when the nest shifts over from the wintering strategy into the spring growth type strategy. So there's a switch over of the nest. We're in this particular time right in here. So that's when the winter bees are handing off those proteins and fats. They're hanging on all through winter, and they're passing it on to the next generation to rejuvenate that nest into spring. So this is a big switch over, okay? So right in here, right in this extreme balance, when those bees pass that protein on to the next generation of brood, it's almost like there's a time clock starts, right? So they have 3 weeks to live, and then right in here, those bees have to emerge. So there's quite a balance in that particular time. So we can take advantage of this particular time of the year, and we can measure these bees perfectly, so we can tell what's going on inside our nest in the spring. I lean really heavily on assessing my stock, and I would suggest everybody do the same. We have to know what we have in our apiary so we can manage it, right? We can't manage something we don't know, what we don't know we have. So what I go through, the first round we go through, I'm tipping all the hives back for a number of reasons, but for one of the reasons is to assess my hive condition. And I'm a big believer of counting frames from underneath, assessing your hives from underneath, okay? Because the bees won't lie to you when you look underneath the colony, because that cluster is fully defined right down the bottom. You pop the lid open, you look over, those bees are going to spread over the top bars, and you look at an 8 frame, but it's actually only a 4 frame. So it's a bit deceiving. So put the back work into it, tip those hives, and then count your frames. So I'd count this as a 4, okay, and make that a 4, let's say. And over here, I'd count those as 10s. Okay. So what I do is those 4s, I buy these little drink tickets, buy them at the corner store, and I'll mark these ones as mediums. The 4s to 6s in there, I count them as medium. So I put a white tag on them. These big guys I mark with a blue, those 8 to 10s. I mark them as blue. Anybody smaller I mark as a red. Those guys are possibly trouble, so I'll maybe shift them off to another yard or put specific attention to them. But what I do is I'm going to mark these guys as blue. That's the first assessment around. So here's 2 colonies in the spring. I've marked them as blue. One of these colonies has a fantastic queen going on inside. Okay? And this other colony looks exactly the same, but the queen's failed on me. But they look exactly the same right now, right? So here we are in spring. Here's the good colony. It's a 9 frame, let's call it, with the vigorous queen. So let's say she's laying 2,000 eggs. Let's stretch it to 2,000 eggs. The other colony to the side, it got the hive into winter very well. But something happened, the queen's failing, right? So now let's say she's petered out. She's petered out in the spring, so she's a failing queen. But those hives coming out of the winter shed look exactly the same at this point in time. So they're both marked as blue. I'll do a second assessment as we come back through in a few weeks. So now this is middle of April. And you're going to see this good queen. She's gone through that turnover. She's going into the spring now. And that colony has improved, right? You're looking at a population improvement. And your brood nest is showing the same. So that colony is good. She's going. This other hive over here, tipping those hives back, right? You're looking at this, and she's laying stagnant. She's not doing anything for you. Brood nest is flat. This is the time when you want to target these hives. You can recognize these guys as being failing hives, right? So if you can identify the hive at this time, requeen that hive, you can bring that life back in. The next assessment that comes through, let's say we're going through in the split. I'm taking a split off these guys because they're terrific. These guys are going to go off to the honey flow. They're going to go off into the honey flow and make me a lot of money. These guys, there's nothing there. So if you missed it here, you better find them there, right? And if you don't do anything about that hive at that point, you're going to send them off to the honey flow. They're not going to make you any money, and they're just going to cost you at the end. So what you want to do is take those guys and you better requeen them, or what I do is I usually take those colonies and then just slash them down into nukes and just take them right out and then turn that nest into a productive one again. So that's how I assess my hives, and that's the reason why. So we know what we have, we can measure our queen condition, and we can promote the excellence within the apiary, because we want the excellence to be able to produce as a honey product. Okay, so that's one thing. So the other thing is managing going through a split without physically finding the queen. I remember I had a few hundred hives. And I remember coming through, leaving a yard, and I just spent an hour and a half looking through 3 hives, looking for the queen, making the split. You go through 20 frames, you can't find that queen. So you go back through again, you find her, make your split. And you go on to the next hive, and you go through all 20 frames again, you can't find that queen. And then so then the third one, the same thing. So I'm spending all this time looking for the queen. And I remember pulling it out of the yard, and I texted my buddy, who had 1,200 hives at that time. I said, how do you do this? Like, how do you split your hives so efficiently and get all your work done? Because I had another 200 hives ahead of me to split, and I had weather coming, a week of bad weather is forecasted, And I'm doing the math, and I'm not going to get my work done before this weather comes in. My dad just picked up queens from Bee-Made. It's sitting on my desk. So I'm thinking, like, this is an impossible situation. Like, I got to change something. I can't go through my split this way. So I texted my buddy. He said, "How do you do it? Like, help me out here." And after a little while, I text back. He said, "You're spending too much time per hive." And I was like, "Wow, no kidding." that's why I texted you. So I politely texted him back. I said, "I realize that. How do you manage that?" So he texted me back in a little bit. He must have been splitting. He was busy, but he just texted back, "Quit finding the queen." So that's okay. Oh, that's interesting. And I didn't know what he meant, so I drove to the next bee yard. It's getting late, and dive into the next hive. And I go in and I can't find that bloody queen again. So I close it up and I drive home, and I'm standing in the shower that evening, and the shower is where I do all my thinking. And I'm standing there thinking, how am I, like, what does he mean, don't find the queen? You can't just split a hive without, you take the queen away, you're defeating the purpose. And I find it dawned on me, so, oh, of course, you don't find the queen. Why are we finding the queen? We're wasting our time. So I'm going to show you what I do. And it's a management practice that is hinged on how I was able to look after 500 or 600 hives as compared to the 1,400 or 1,500 hives now. Is I'm able to split my hives, manage my population growth without putting very little effort into it. And I'm able to schedule my work, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes for my splits, and I can schedule everything out. And not only that, I can also bring employees in to help me with the same process, if we're not having to find the queen. So what I do is I split through the excluder, and I'm going to try to show you what I'm doing here. These are two brood boxes, right? And there's brood in both boxes here. So my intention is to split this colony into two. And let's say there's 8 frames, let's say there's 6 frames of brood in there. I want to keep 4 frames of brood at the bottom. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that top box that was here, I take that top box off and I put it wherever, on top of a lid, the rim. You don't want to squish bees, right? So that top box has been removed. I go to the bottom box, this is before this is on, and I count out 4 frames of brood. That's my magic number in the spring. I'm counting 4 frames of brood. That's all I'm doing. I'm just counting those sheets of brood. If there's 5 down there, I'll bring 1 back up here. If there's only 3 frames of brood down there, I'll bring 1 down to there. Then what I do is I made this little funnel. This is like a laundry tub, and I cut a hole in the bottom and made a little wooden rim on it. But that's a funnel. So what I'm doing is I'm taking all those bees from the top, and I'm shaking that entire box down to the bottom. And I'm not looking for the queen. There's no sense for looking for this queen. So I'm shaking them all down. I'm putting these empty frames into this box to the side. So when all those bees are shaken down to the bottom, that queen has to be down there, right? So I put this queen excluder over top there, and then I put this box back on top. So all the bees are in the bottom, the queen excluder's in, and then that empty box is back on top. Those bees are going to go through the excluder and cover that brood I left in the top box for the split, right? And the queen's going to be in the bottom, I know that. And by doing it this way, you're not wasting time looking for the queen. It's just a matter of sorting frames, shaking bees. You can hire guys to help you with this. You can have guys opening up, if they're not as skilled, they can open up hives for you. You can pretend you're a surgeon, you can do your work, and then guys behind you closing up, right? Or you can train guys to do this, where you don't have to actually find the queen. You just count the sheets of brood. So then what we do is we come back that evening, or I like to plan it through, miserable weather when the bees aren't flying. But then you just take the top boxes off and you just throw them onto these hive pallets, right? And I use an easy loader. I don't do any lifting. I do as little lifting as I can, and it works really well. We just set out the yard with a bunch of pallets, and we just simply strip off the boxes from the top, put them onto our pallets, and then we're moving our, this is one of my guys here, we're setting up pallets. This is a particularly strong yard, and we have a lot of splits in this yard. So what we're doing is we are stripping the boxes onto the pallets, and the guys are coming, just lifting them up, putting them onto our trucks. So we're not actually having to handle much. Carrie, she loves to make nukes for me. She makes a lot of queens, and she's always bugging me to make more nukes. So instead of making full splits, another thing we can do is harvest that brood in the top, the brood and the bees, because it's the same situation. I have the queen in the bottom now. So on the top here, we will harvest 2 frames of brood and a frame of honey, and we'll just make up a lot of nukes this way. We just used up. We'll take the nukes out the same way with Easy Loader, and we're cattle producers, we have lots of pasture, and they make excellent mating yards. So we'll just spread these nukes out all over the place. So that is the secret on splitting hives. Quit looking for the queen. We don't have to look for the queen. Just split the hive, right? And it's made my life so much easier. Feeding our bees. I really believe in feeding our bees. I think it's absolutely essential, especially, I've only been beekeeping, things are really changing in the environment right now, for the good or for the bad. That's a different argument, but we need to feed our bees. We have to make sure our colonies are being well nourished all throughout their entire life cycles. So right in here, right when those winter bees are switching that nest into a springtime strategy, this is a very critical time for that hive to develop an adequate nest. We have to make sure that this brood in here is well fed and well developed. There's study that is proving to us that a malnourished nest will show unthriftiness further down in its lifetime. Larvae that is not adequately being fed as is being developed will show itself as being an unthrifty bee later on in its foraging lifetime. So we want these bees to be well fed so we can ensure that these bees are going to work for us later on in their lifetime. In the spring, we have a lot of pollen flow and really good pollen, right? And bees need pollen. They need pollen, period. And they need a lot of it coming in. So in the spring, when we have a lot of pollen coming in, that hive is laying, the queen's laying a lot of frames of brood. Sometimes they'll lay like 5 or 6 frames, and they'll get going. But if you notice in this, this is a beautiful frame of brood. But they're pretty much living hand to mouth here. There's no pollen reserves in this colony at all. So when the hive's rearing a nest of this caliber, we have to make sure that if they fall into any type of protein dearth, that they have enough food on hand to be able to sustain that nest throughout their growth period. This is May 17th of 2015. There's a terrible winter storm come through right before my main split. And a week and a half before this, we were going through our colonies and we were throwing down protein patties, like 2 pounds of patties on all our hives. And I'm thinking, boy, I'm wasting my time and wasting my money here, because of all this pollen coming in, and it's a beautiful spring and the hives just look fantastic. But the problem is I can't get through my apiary quicker than 3 days. And I didn't actually see this storm coming 2 days ahead. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. But this storm came, and that entire nest, it left the colony in a 5-day dearth, extreme dearth. This colony is requiring a tremendous amount of nutrition. We had the patties on for the week and a half before that. They were hardly touching the patties at that time, but within 3 days they consumed all that patty, and they were able to continue the movement forward of that springtime nest. We came in after, it was like 5 days after we came in to follow through with the split, and we're putting on more protein at that time, but that queen hadn't stopped laying. She continued her expansion, her movement forward. If we didn't have enough, if there wasn't enough pollen in this nest, if we didn't have protein on it to supplement them for protein at that time, those colonies would have, what they do is when they go, when they fall into protein stress, they'll cannibalize the developing brood around the outside. And they'll cannibalize as much as they need until they can find that balance to sustain that nest moving forward until nutrition comes in. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to, we want to keep that brood, right? So that's why we got to make sure we have enough feed in these colonies. If they have enough pollen stored, that's perfect. If they don't have enough pollen, we got to recognize that, and we got to make sure we have protein on there to be able to get them through times like this, and make sure that times like this don't put us out of business. Okay. There's just some patty that I put on my nest. I'm also starting to adopt a fall time wintering strategy, or a fall time feeding strategy. Just like in the spring, I find it's extremely crucial to make sure our bees have enough nutrients to be able to develop that winter nest that they need to take them through the winter. We're grain farmers, and we're contributing to the problem that's happening just like all the rest of the farmers. This is a field of soybeans, and we've got our fingertips on technology right now that has allowed us, it's not the GMOs and it's not the Roundup, but it's the ability using that technology to farm fields with absolutely nothing in it but the crop itself, right? This is like a living desert to bees. This is great for farmers because all the money we're investing into our land and all the money we're investing into the crop, we're seeing returns on it. But we're eliminating all that diversity out there, right? And that's a huge problem. Bees need diversity. Bees need, we call it weeds as farmers, but beekeepers call it food. Like we need that nourishment all through the year. So right here, this is the winter nest being developed. Right here. And this brood nest here is what turns into these winter bees that sustain themselves all the way through the winter. Okay. This is a very critical time for those winter bees to develop themselves. And right about this time, farmers are, harvesting, so the fields are dead. The RMs have already sprayed the ditches and mowing the ditches, so there's nothing in the ditches, right? So it's a time of dearth. So these bees, and if you're lucky enough to have an area where you have diversity, those bees will be fine because there's pollen coming in. But a lot of the times we have our hives in a place where there's nothing coming in, and they're just living off the resources that they've stored within their nest, right? All the surplus that they have in there. If they don't have that surplus in their nest of pollen, they can't develop that winter nest properly. They can't develop those bees to turn it into a proper winter nest. So I find right here, right after I take those honey boxes off the hive, this is one of the most critical times of the year. Give them some protein, give them some supplement, just to make sure they have what they need to develop that nest. Some yards don't need it, but other yards need it, and I put a lot of emphasis on that.
5 again.
So this is just a slide I got off of Randy Oliver's site. I bug him quite a bit, and so he's just showing here what a foraging bee looks like that foraging bee after it mines everything out, it becomes expendable and carries on as a foraging bee to bring in the nutrients. They got nothing in their bodies here. This is what we want in And a good wintering bee, this is a nurse bee. It's full of fats, full of proteins. This is what we're trying to develop in our wintering nest. And then, you know, before you bring the bees in after you, this is what you want to see, is nice, adequate, healthy looking colonies going into winter. So before I end, I just want to touch on when you're building this business and you're adopting all these management strategies and you're overworked and all this kind of stuff, don't forget to live your life and drive your purpose and make it work, because without everything else, then it all falls apart. So thanks for your time.